Okay, let's start the lecture. We have been reading about 2,500 years of human history in connection with the concept of Asia. And today we will take a look at the last 60, 70 years. And we start from the post-war situation, when European power in the world fell down drastically, and USA became the new leader of the world system. And they quite consciously and purposefully made changes in the way the world was understood geographically. They reinterpreted the world so that the divisions began to suit their own global control from their own point of view. It's the rule of language game that we will deal with here. And of course, most of this took place under the situation of the Cold War. But the world was divided into two blocks, as you know, one led by the USA and the other one by the Soviet Union. And a kind of balance of power situation was between these two camps. The camp led by the USA was stronger from the beginning, because with its allies they had Western Europe on one end, Japan at the other end, both quite strong economic and political actors. And then the non-socialist third world was following them. USSR was leading a group of quite weaker countries, and they was also part of the third world here. Although Europe was weakened, the world map still tended to remain Europe-centered, because the biggest opposition between these camps took place over Europe. The wars were fought elsewhere, basically in the third world, but the main posing took place over Europe. And because this East-West distinction was the most overriding distinction in the world, also countries like Japan or South Korea, Singapore, and so on, they belonged to the West and not to the East. Nihon wa Nishikawa no ichi-in deshita. So, continental concepts, which had been quite important within the European argumentation, they fell down in importance. And political concepts became the important ones. Europe was also divided into the western part and the eastern part. Soviet Union was so big compared with this smaller Europe that it now became, that Soviet Union from the European point of view was not always counted within Europe, but it was a special category. And the Middle East also starts to take shape here. And what remained, or the Western Europe here, losing their colonies also very soon after the Second World War, was a collection of quite small countries. So the position that they had occupied before the war fell down quite drastically. So the categories that were used, they were politics and economics. Asian Europe became concepts of relatively small importance, as I said, and Europeans lost the ability to name places in the global setting. In the beginning, the Soviet Union also was quite forward-going and important in these naming games. But USA basically was the one that was most important. So divisions, West and East, communism versus capitalism, if you see it from the eastern part. A progressive world, again meaning socialism, versus reactionary world, again seen from the socialist camp. Or liberalism versus socialism, free world versus totalitarianism. These were the important concepts and not the continental names. Most of my lecture will deal with the Western argumentation because it is the one that won in the end. And in Western argumentation, the socialist and communist threat was painted with big words. Chiang Kai-shek, after he had escaped to Taiwan, published a book, Soviet Russia and China, where the argument was that China is no more an independent country, but it simply is a lackey of Soviet Union, or basically Russia. And the map depicts a black area, it's not very clear, but anyway, that's what it depicts. Starting from the Finnish and German borders here, and most of the continent is occupied by communist Russia. So it is made to look very big, and what remains here in the rims of the Eurasian continent is made to look quite small. If we draw into a map all of these countries that became socialist at one point of their history, you see the socialist sphere as very big. It was not so strong economically or even militarily. Well, the Soviet Union had the nuclear weapons, but anyway, the whole camp was not too strong. Especially in economics it was quite weak, but it could be painted cartographically in these maps in a very big way. Anyway, if you move into a situation from the 1960s onwards, when China parted from the Soviet camp, you could still show in many European publications the Soviet Union is very big, and Western Europe is only a small place. Because it's so big, you don't put it into or let's say it in another way, you put it into a category of its own. It begins to form a continent of its own, the Soviet Union continent. And you can find a similar pictorial argumentation also when you go to look at Soviet texts. This is Atlas Mira, a map of the whole world. Atlas means a book of maps. Physicogeography Český Atlas Mira, published in Moscow in 1964. Also here you see the Soviet Union drawn in a different color. And actually you can see they have drawn a kind of boundary around it, so it appears as a separate continent visually. So it was not only in the west, but also in the east, where a very different separate camp was depicted. And to continue this argument, let's take a look at an American geographic book written by George B. Cressy, published first time in 1944, and I have used the second edition 1951. Asia's Lands and Peoples. How does an American in this post-war situation define Asia? And how does he argue? What does he say about the United States? Midway between Europe and Asia and South America, the United States is indeed the Middle Kingdom. It has also assumed the position of China, become the center of the world. And it is looks from this position of the center to the rest of the world. Geographic ignorance is immeasurably expensive, and understanding your geostrategy is not in itself a solution for the problems of the Pacific. But without it, no sure peace can prevail. Here is a far bigger space than Americans have ever thought in terms of before. Asia and the Pacific are a new world where stability has not yet been achieved. The United States is a Pacific as well as a North Atlantic power. Earlier, the USA had been mostly oriented towards Europe and European affairs, but now, when they began to form a center of their own, they had to start looking also very strongly towards Asia over the Pacific Ocean. To some extent, they had, of course, been doing this also before, but now this became a strategic necessity. What and where is Asia? Is the huge landmass of Eurasia one continent or two? The common practice, this means the schoolbook geography, is to slice the Union of Soviet Socialist republics in two parts along an arbitrary line, different on every map, and assign one part to Europe, another to Asia. This so-called continental boundary in the general vicinity of the Ural Mountains follows no significant division or topography, drainage, climate, soils, land use, culture, or history. It accords with neither crest of the Urals nor any political subdivisions. The conventional line is an arbitrary fiction of early map makers, the geographic validity of the sanction of those whose country it divides. Even the crest of the Urals supplies no more continental boundary than the Appalachians. Would anyone divide the United States into two continents? So he's arguing the Strahlen-Berry interpretation of the world. And that was, of course, a political one, not a geographic one. So now, in the post-Second World War situation, we finally get strong arguments against that. And these are quite sensible arguments. Europeans have looked eastward to Asia, hence the usage of Near East and Far East. Near East used to mean countries like Turkey, Iran, Iraq. And Far East used to mean what we now call Eastern Asia. These directional terms have no significance to people of Asia itself or to Americans. Accordingly, they are not used in this volume. An American does not want to use European concepts. They have their own ones. The single mass of Eurasia has at least 6 major realms, not 2. These divisions recognize great cultural contrast as well as physical geography. Several of these subcontinents are more populous and more important economically or historically than several of the other continents. One of these areas is the Soviet Union, as large as all of North America. The Soviet Union, also here, is argued as its own continent. Another is China and Japan. Southeastern Asia is the third. India and Pakistan, officially known as subcontinent, is fourth. And Southwest forms the fifth. Again, then an argument to push down the Europeans. The Atlantic, Baltic, and Mediterranean peninsulas in the West, commonly known as Europe, form the sixth major area. Europe is thus defined as the Western Peninsula Eurasia and nothing else. So Europeans down. Well, again about the Soviet. When one enters the Soviet Union, he's in a different world. It's not only a continent, it's also a separate world. So it becomes a de facto third continent in Eurasia. If you look at other books, both scholarly works and fairly public works, you see same kind of argumentation. Dorothy Fuhrman's 1960 published Asia, Golden Book Picture Atlas of the World, meant for very general public. Draws USSR with brown, same as Africa, so it is out of Asia, and Asia is not being dealt with here. And the rest of the area here from Turkey to Japan is depicted in this book. But later, this area also starts to fall out of these maps. A few more. Dwight Cook, in his book, There is No Asia, published in 1954. In the Cold War situation, when there was competition between USA and Soviet Union, and China had been lost quite recently to communism. Today the best that can be said is that we have not yet lost Asia. But if we go as we have been going, we will lose it to communism. So all the American foreign political strategy is being depicted in these arguments. There is no single entity in the Far East called Asia. Unlike America or Europe or even the Middle East, there is no Asia. The nations of the Middle East or Europe have far more in common than we realize. Certain basic words in every culture of the West have the same meaning: good, evil, dictator, profit, economics, vote, individual, dignity, cooperation, freedom, and God. The only things the nations of Asia have in common are negative. They are not white. Also, racial argumentation became a taboo in Europe, not so strong in the USA, so he's still using that. They are not well fed, and they do not trust or admire the West. So Asia is a non-clear place that cannot even be defined clearly. Ralph Bulgen's 1974 Tradition and Change in Modern Age. The cartography picture of the region includes large portions of the area once called Asia Minor, but better known now as the Middle East. So it is a new name. Asia Minor or West Asia is falling, it is not being used. And Middle East is a new name for this place. And he excludes them. They are not Asia, they are something else. It's not necessary to go into these areas. If we look at a number of languages, and most of these are European languages that I know, this American usage to call the Middle East in the American way, and not Near East as the old European way, it has been done through most Western European languages. Well, in English you can sometimes still see Near East, but it's very rare. Middle East is the normal name. Proche Orient, Oriente Próximo, Vicino Oriente in French, Spanish, and Italian are also rarely used. In Japanese dictionaries you can find Kinto, but it refers to the old usage and not the current one. Middle East in English, Moyen Orient in French, Oriente Medio in Spanish, Medio Oriente in Italian. Chuto, Chukinto in Japanese, Middle East in Chinese. Yeah. Mellersta Östern in Swedish, Mittöstern in Norway, Mellemöstern in Norway, Nahosten auf Deutsch in German. Lähi-itä in Finnish, Lähi-itä in Estonian. Basically, Europeans have also submitted, given up their own vocabulary and are using European words nowadays. So this also is a special separate continent nowadays. And more about it. Of Clemens, 1964, a factual study of Asia. This is what you depict. Japan is here, Korea, China, Southeast Asia. Here the western boundary is a bit unclear, whether you have Afghanistan or Pakistan there or not, depends on the book. But India normally is the western boundary. Paul Welty, the Asians, and so on. Asia becomes separated. So we have now 4 different continents in Eurasia. And also the Cold War ended. That did not end this division. It basically simply has become stronger during the past 20 years. Also, well, we don't know what will happen after another 20 years, but at the moment the situation is like this. After the Cold War, world political geography again entered a new period of flux. And it was great time, I remember it. Peace had come to the world. I used to be at the time the chief editor of a Finnish journal of peace research. And it was hard time because nobody wanted anymore to write to a journal of peace research because peace had come, peace had arrived, and you didn't need the journal of peace research anymore. We changed the name of the journal to Journal of World Politics and then continued. But peace had come. They were quite nice, happy years. 89, 90. And the world entered into a situation of conceptual flux. There was a search for new concepts with which to structure the world. There were culturalist concepts. Religion emerged, especially Islam, but also Christianity became more vocal at this period. Ethnicity became again a big word. And continental concepts, Europe, Asia, Middle East, America, emerged again as important concepts with which to define regions for the world. We had many kinds of books in the 1990s. Francis Fukuyama's ideas were perhaps the most famous at this time. The idea was that the states are divided into 2 different categories. They are post-national states, post-historical, universal, homogeneous, liberal democracies, where nationalism is no more an important thing. They can engage in peaceful integration, trade, development, organization building, and the state becomes less and less important all the time. Then we have historical states which still have conflict and strong state borders, which are still only building up their states. Soviet Russia, Soviet Union, Russia was a bit undefined category in this. You could place here USA, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, perhaps Singapore also at this time. At the top echelon of the world. And then the rest of the world here. And it was expected that sooner or later, to the next few decades, these states would also enter this kind of post-historical level. Japanese Tanaka Akihiko, his book Atarashi Chūsei 21世紀の世界システム, The New Middle Ages, the world system in the 21st century. The New Middle Ages is a similar concept as post-historical in Fukuyama's argumentation. It refers to a situation where we have the states, but then we have companies, various kinds of movements, private organizations, religions, whatever, many kinds of elements where people's identity is directed. And again, we have similar groups of countries where a number of them, Western Europe, Northern America, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, have entered this phase, which is considered more developed than the rest. Then we have nation states, which are still not as able to integrate with each other than the Middle-aged states. And then we have places that are not really even states anymore, but they are in chaos. Basically Soviet Union, Russia, and most African states. Also, this is not continental geography. This is only an example how these, at the 1990s, you had to try to define, to look for concepts with which to define the world. Or Samuel Huntington, another very famous person. John Agnew drew Huntington's argumentation into a map, and I have placed colors on that. His divisions were more cultural. To some extent, well, they are with difficult definitions. Anyway, he's talking about Western Europe, Northern America, Australia, New Zealand as one group, the Western civilization. But he's already putting Japan into a separate, its own category. The Japanese civilization. You have only one country there, mostly groups of countries in the other spheres. It simply is an explanation that he didn't know where to put Japan. Japan was an economic great power at this time, not a small one, but the second biggest economy in the world. It had to be somewhere, so he simply put it into a separate category. Then we have Orthodox, meaning Russia, and many of those former Russian republics here. Then we have the Confucian cultural sphere, basically China and Vietnam, Korea. He didn't put Japan there, he made it separate, different. Then you have Latin America, which is American culture minus USA and Canada. Then we have Africa, which is non-Islamic parts. And we have the Islamic sphere. Again, the continental names here. But the Western camp starts to become separate. Then we have Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, who published in his blue book this map of the old world, which I showed to some of you in the first time when I was speaking here 4 weeks ago. Where we now have Europe here, the former Soviet Union sphere here, Middle East as an Islamic sphere here. It's not only what used to be called Western Asia, but also Northern Africa, Western Africa here, and Asia here. And in this map, also Australia and New Zealand are taken away from this group of countries and placed together with the Asian area. And this is the map from which quite much of Asian argumentation later, the 1990s, and after that, during this millennium, has happened, especially from Japan. And so we are in this nice situation where we have Central Asia here, because Central Asia has been named using old European concepts. After the Cold War, a new name was needed here. These republics that were no more part of the Soviet Union. And there they took an old concept, which had been used in the 19th century. And then we have Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, all together composing East Asia here and South Asia. Middle East here, then Soviet Union is also here, as it's not Soviet Union, Russia here as its own category. Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Western Europe, and Central Europe. Eastern Europe is a taboo concept, cannot be used anymore. Western Asia is not being used, only rarely. Northern Asia does not exist. It may be that because this is an unbalanced situation, the map will go on developing during our lifetime. But at the moment, we are dealing with these concepts. This is the end of this first part. Any questions about this? Shitsumon, commento, hihan ga arimasu ka? Nai. Ha?
I want to ask about this last slide.
This one?
Yeah,
Yes.
so, you say East Europe, the term of East Europe become a taboo concept. So what is called now?
It is called often Central Europe. That's what they want to be called. Or sometimes Central Eastern Europe. Because Eastern Europe refers to the socialist past. And West means good and Eastern Europe means bad. So if you say to people from Poland or Czech or Romania and so on that you are Eastern Europeans, they may get angry. They want to be real Europeans. And Eastern Europe, actually, it is being used sometimes here in Central Europe, in this, as a bad word, that you are still on a lower level of existence. So in polite conversation, you don't use the concept of Eastern Europe. Anything else?